Distinguished guests, the conference will be live streamed on KNDA's official YouTube channel, KNDA Live. We have two channels, English and Korean. Please choose your language. Session 2 will proceed in English. For those who need simultaneous interpretation, please head to the reception desk for the receiver. Thank you. Good afternoon. Now we are about to start Session 2, Economic Cooperation for Co-Prosperity in the Asia-Pacific Region. Moderator of this session is Mr. Park Tae-ho, President of Lee & Co. Global Commerce Institute.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon. I would like to welcome all of you, speakers as well as participants in the audience, to the session 2 of the 2022 IFAN's Conference on Global Affairs. I'm Tae-ho Park, President of Lee & Co. Global Commerce Institute, which is a very small think tank within a law firm called Lee & Co. And I was the former Trade Minister of Korea. I'll be the moderator for this session on economic cooperation for prosperity in the Asia-Pacific region. As you know, due to COVID-19 pandemic, we were unable to have in-person meetings for the last 2 years. But fortunately, this year, we are able to come back to a face-to-face meeting, although some speakers and participants are participating in the conference online. Before we start, I feel very sorry to inform you that one of our speakers, Mr. Menon of India, is unable to participate due to his personal situation. Well, we still have excellent speakers in our session, and I'm very happy to say that all speakers are here with us in person. I'd like to introduce our prominent speakers. To my left, former Minister for Trade, Minister Yoo Myung-hee is here with us. And then Professor Son Yeol of Yonsei University is also here with us. He's actually leading East Asia Institute in Seoul. And then we have an ambassador Australian ambassador to Republic of Korea, Catherine Raper, is also here with us. Lastly but not least, Professor Lee Hyo-young of Department of International Trade and International Economic Trade and Development Studies at IFANS. Before we start, I would like to say a few words on the procedures of the session. I would like to ask each speaker to spend about 9 minutes on the first topic. We have 2 topics given by the organizer. The first topic is on the assessment and the future prospect of economic security situation in the Asia-Pacific region. Originally, I was planning to give each speaker to spend 9 minutes, but 7 minutes, but Mr. Menon is not coming, so I gave 2 more minutes to speakers. After we hear all presentations, we'll have a brief discussion for about 5 minutes among speakers. You can raise the questions or make some comments on each other. And then I'll move to the second topic of the session, which is assessment of future prospects and prospects of economic and security policies of the Korean government under new President Yoon Suk-yeol. I also like each speaker to spend about 7 minutes for this topic. Again, same as the first round. After the second round of the presentation, we'll have a brief session for about 5 minutes to discuss among speakers. And then remaining time will be allowed for interactions with the audience in the floor. Since we are given 90 minutes, I ask presenters to keep their remarks within the given time limits. One last thing, as a moderator, for the second topic, I would like to note that presenters will be welcome to make useful recommendations to the Korean government if you have. This is a very important issue for this seminar. Without further ado, I would like to first invite Professor Lee. And then you have about 9 minutes to present.
Yes, thank you very much for the introduction. I am Hyo-young Lee, Associate Professor of the Department of Economy, Trade and Development in IFANS, KNDA. I'm very honored to be joining this very distinguished gathering of experts and practitioners in this area. I believe that the second session today is titled Economic Cooperation for Co-Prosperity in the Asia-Pacific region. But I think that the real issue that we wanted to discuss today is economic security. And we all know that economic security has been quite a buzzword recently in today's world of international economy and trade. As a first panelist in this session, I think I would first like to begin by talking about what is Korea's economic security, because there has been a lot of discussion, but we are still talking about it. And I think that we can have a whole new session on this topic itself, but to make the story short, I think that in the end, economic security is national interest. So more importantly, since Korea is a very highly trade-dependent country, the importance of the Korean economy and the competitiveness of its businesses is a very important national interest for Korea. And however, at the same time, now we are living in a world of great uncertainty and rising geopolitical risks. And so we need to consider that economic decisions can no longer just be made based on commercial interests. So we need to be a little bit more comprehensive and consider national security and risks involved in making economic decisions. So, but at the same time, I think we also need to be aware of the risks of excessive securitization of issues, especially those issues that were traditionally non-security related, such as economic security. Since there seems to be actually an increasing trend to use the logic of economic security to justify trade protectionist measures that also have discriminatory effects on the trade of trading partners, important trading partners as well, more recently. And so I think that we need to be aware of this risk. But at the same time, as I mentioned previously, we need to consider the risks of geopolitical tensions. And so I guess we need to have a balanced approach between the nexus between economy and security, which I think the devil is in the details. Easily said than done. But we are also living in a world where we are inadvertently have to line up among blocks that are being formed depending on different systems and values. And so in such a world, putting economic security or a country's national interests will have to be a top priority in setting our decisions or strategies to face or deal with the various kinds of international issues that we need to face today. So having said this, I believe that, I think that the questions that the moderator gave us formally before we came to the session is, for me, for starters, to talk about some of the imminent economic security risks that Korea is facing. And I think that one of the most important imminent economic security risks that Korea is facing right now is the supply chain restructuring efforts that have been triggered by the deepening US-China tensions right now. Not so many years ago, we were living in a world which has been led by trade growth, which has been based on the expansion of global supply chains. And we have been living in a world for nearly 20 years where we were very closely interconnected and very highly interdependent. and investment decisions were based on commercial interests and lower costs. And also, since China has been the hub of the global value chains, businesses have made a lot of investments in China because of their low labor costs and their manufacturing skills that they also contain. So what our companies had considered to be most effective and profitable in making investment decisions are no longer considered to be in line with economic security. And so they're faced with the decision, they're faced with the situation of having to realign their supply chains, which they have made in the past based on past decision-making processes. And so this is inevitably quite a burden for the businesses to follow. However, I think that actually there is no choice for Korea to make, because we have to consider that the future growth path for our future industries lies where the advanced technology is flowing and growing. So we need to consider where the future market is. But as you all know, China is becoming a target of very strong US economic sanctions. And so the possibility of advanced technology growing in China is very low. And so we need to consider the fact that the future market is not in China anymore. And so we may need to consider this, and businesses may need to consider this in making their future decisions. And I think that's an imminent risk that we need to face right now. Another important economic security risk that we are facing is the rise of trade and investment barriers under the banner of strong environmental and labor standards. This is according to the US or the EU, the advanced countries which can afford to internalize the labor costs and the environmental costs in order to make the market more fairly competitive, and also establish a level playing field. In fact, there have been efforts in the past to place environmental issues higher on the priority list among other trade issues, but it has not been successful because there are many underdeveloped economies that cannot afford to internalize these environmental costs. And so it could be more unfair to them if we mandatorily adopt environmental rules or labor rules at the same time. However, recently, due to the rising importance of addressing climate change issues, it seems to be now the trend that we cannot afford not dealing with environmental issues on a global scale. And so such measures as Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM, is being adopted by the EU. And there are also measures to legislate due diligence in supply chains by adopting environmental and labor standards by the EU as well. And also, we all know very well that the US Biden administration is placing environmental and labor issues very high on their trade policy agenda. And so, all in all, this means that based on the environmental standards and the labor standards, the investment and trade barriers are becoming higher. And it is inevitably going to be a burden for Korean businesses trying to make entries into the US and EU market. And so there are going to be huge costs involved. And I know that companies are trying to adopt ESG into their business practices, but it is going to involve a lot of costs. And the transparency and the traceability requirements that the companies have to adopt in order to accommodate the supply chain restructuring efforts is also going to be very painful for the companies as well. So this is all for now. If I have a chance to talk about these risks, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lee. As a moderator, I don't want to speak too much, but I would just make one point regarding your last your statement regarding Chinese market in the future. Maybe China is not a market for Korean companies anymore in the future. But at this moment, this is my dilemma. We have to distinguish between to what extent, global chain decoupling will be pursued by the United States. For the last 2 years, U.S. imports from China is increasing, even though they are fighting to each other. So in other words, except very advanced security-related technology items, maybe U.S. is doing something to decouple things from China. But for certain areas, even semiconductors, very highly sophisticated semiconductors, U.S. is concerned. But the normal, ordinary type of semiconductors, maybe they will allow to trade each other. So in other words, maybe China is growing very rapidly, and the wages are also rising rapidly. So China will not be a world factory anymore. But maybe in the plain kind of ordinary products, China will serve as a world market. So in other words, we have to be careful to distinguish between, this is my own opinion, certain area which is sensitive, we have to support US policies or whatever, but for the remaining items, they will have a high demand by huge population. So Korean firms should exploit that domestic market too. This is my just one comment. Maybe later you can respond to me. Well, let me now, because Professor Lee is a scholar, and now I want to invite the practitioner, which is the former Minister for Trade of Korea, Minister Yoo Myung-hee. Please.
Thank you. First of all, let me express my thanks to IFANS for organizing this annual conference on the very pertinent topic. Professor Lee elaborated on various aspects of economic security risks faced by Korea as well as by the Asia-Pacific region, and the growing geopolitical competition between US and China, as well as fragility exposed by COVID-19 and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, have indeed brought economic security concerns to the fore. So now countries are attempting to insulate themselves from external shocks as well as geo-economic pressures. So they are now introducing various measures, for example, to enhance their supply chain resilience, and also applying full-blown industrial policies and launching bilateral and multilateral partnership arrangements with like-minded countries, and also at the same time introducing restrictive measures to protect their own strategic technologies. So these are all, in some sense, worthy objectives to pursue, especially in this very difficult, testing, uncertain time. However, if not well managed, this entails significant trade risks in the Asia-Pacific region, including in Korea, which has greatly benefited from globalization and an open, multilateral, rules-based trading system. So let me particularly touch upon 3 points: supply chain protectionism, industrial subsidy competition, and fragmented trading order. So first, supply chain resilience and the risk of protectionism. So as I mentioned before, COVID-19 induced disruptions and growing geopolitical tensions between the US and China, and Russia's invasion, Russia's war in Ukraine. They all have made policymakers around the world to focus and reassess the supply chains and reconfigure the global value chains. And this change in reality has prompted to reevaluate their supply chain policies, and countries have responded to this challenge in one of the 3 ways: stockpiling and reshoring, or domestic production, and diversification. And these days, in this very volatile and unpredictable trading environment, where even these trade dependencies and supply chain interdependence can be weaponized and used as a geopolitical tool, this is very, important topic and maybe almost important. However, at the same time, these measures to enhance supply chain resilience, this can easily slide into new kinds of murky protectionism and also sort of self-sufficiency with a nationalist bias. For example, even though countries are launching various partnership arrangements, like the proliferation of various partnership arrangements in the region to enhance supply chains with the like-minded countries, in some sense, they are also introducing the concept of friendshoring or ally shoring. But those countries participating in those initiatives, in some sense, they compete with each other. They all want to attract manufacturing facilities and strategic industries into their own territories, and they compete with each other in the same global markets for same talent. So if they don't manage their tensions very well based on trust, it's easy for them to slide into protectionism. No single state can muster all the resources to produce what is needed within their own territory. So improving supply chain resilience should not mean turning away from international cooperation or economic openness. It can be achieved through cooperation with partners. I just like to point out that important principle. And second, revival of industrial policies. So now industrial policies and subsidies, they are back and they are in vogue among major economies. And China has is well known and has long pursued its industrial policy, as well demonstrated in its Made in China 2025. But now, even the West, which has been long committed to laissez-faire economics, has recently also embraced industrial policy. And for the recent several months, the US has passed the two signature bills, CHIPS and Science Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, which will pour billions of dollars in strategic industries. Well, without coordination among like-minded countries, or not just like-minded countries, without coordination among countries and some appropriate disciplines, this competition might end up in subsidy wars by giving ever larger subsidies to attract more factories into their own territories. And this could result in industry overcapacity and trade disputes. We can look at the recent examples from EU, US subsidy war in regard to Airbus and Boeing. Just last year, they resolved this dispute after 17-year-long dispute over the Airbus-Boeing case. So this could be another risk in regard to trade. And third, trade fragmentation. The IMF warned in its recent regional economic outlook, which was published just last Friday, that signs of trade fragmentation are increasing, with the trade-related uncertainties surging in recent years. And that Asia-Pacific has more to lose than any other region if the global trade system splits up because of the geopolitical tensions. So as the IMF discussed, the geopolitical tensions have raised the prospect that national security concerns might trump the shared economic benefits of global trade. And such a prospect would be very, very costly, especially for Asia, which is key player in global supply chains. So in regard to supply chain disruptions, broadly speaking, there are two types: intentional ones or unintentional ones. Unintentional supply chain disruptions can happen due to, for example, natural disaster or a pandemic. And intentional supply chain reconfiguration can happen due to geopolitical or strategic reasons. These unintentional disruptions can recover quickly compared to intentional ones. And this intentional disruption caused by geostrategic reasons, for example, caused by such as export controls in strategic industries, that could actually leave a very significant impact on those particular industries. And in that case, this will pose really a significant challenge especially to this region, which has achieved its economic success through the globally connected supply chains and as well as the open rules-based multilateral trading system. So let me stop here, and what can we do? Perhaps I might touch upon that topic in my second response to the second topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Yu. It reminds me the importance of Mr. Trump's policy in early part of the years. He criticized China for government subsidization into certain industries or advanced technology industries. So industrial policy is now, is back in even United States. And also this Inflation Reduction Act, it has some component of discriminating foreign products or, so what I'm saying is here, we actually support US policies because they are criticizing unfair trade practices of certain countries. But now US is doing himself or itself this kind of subsidies or industrial policies and discriminating policies. So maybe our alliance, including Australia, we may lose our legitimacy in supporting US policies because they may violate FTAs or even WTO principles. So we are a little bit concerned about that. Okay. In that note, I will invite Ambassador Raper for your first presentation.
Thank you very much, Minister Bach, and it's an honour to be on this panel today amongst such esteemed experts and speakers. A big thank you to IFANS for organising today's conference, and also I want to just at the outset express my condolences to everyone impacted by the awful tragedy in Itaewon on the weekend. So I'm here to offer a bit of an Australian perspective on the important issues that we're talking about today, particularly the economic security situation in what we call the Indo-Pacific region. And I think the starting point for us, and I think also for Korea and indeed other like-minded countries, is the type of world and region that we want to live and work in. So that is one that is stable, prosperous and respectful of sovereignty. So when we come at it from that starting point, we can then look at the challenges that are proving serious risks to that type of world and region that we want to live in. And I think the previous speakers have done a good job of setting out many of those risks. But I think there was three that I particularly wanted to highlight today. The most serious challenges we would see as the severe supply chain disruptions that we have seen during the pandemic and also as we come out of the pandemic, but also as the consequence of various government actions. I think the urea shortage last year as a result of Chinese export measures and also the impacts on food security and energy prices that we're seeing from Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. Cases in point of those supply chain disruptions. Secondly, and other speakers have referred to this already, we're seeing a very serious and significant fraying of the open rules-based trading system that has underpinned our security and prosperity and economic development in all of our countries and in the region and indeed the world over many decades, and that is a serious concern to ensuring that growth and prosperity continues. And the third very serious risk we'd highlight would be the increasing urgency of climate change. We need to decarbonise our economies and transition to a more sustainable future and quickly. So that is putting pressure also on our countries and on our trade and economic relations. So the answer, I think, to these challenges is not easy. They're intertwined, complex challenges, but we think that countries need to work together in order to tackle them. They're too big for any one country to attempt to deal with alone. So Australia, Korea and other like-minded partners really need to pull together and look at how we can deal with those challenges and preserve the region and the world that we want to live in. So some of the ways that we can do that are by looking at ways that we can build our domestic resilience, by looking at how we can ensure secure and reliable supply chains, and how we can take forward climate action in accordance with WTO rules. We also, of course, as like-minded countries, share a set of values, and one of those values that we share is a belief in open societies and open trade. And indeed, I would argue that those are key strengths of what makes our economies and our societies so important and so good places to live. So when we look at the economic security basket of issues that we've talked about, and Professor Lee made reference to this earlier, we really need to find a balance between preserving the openness of our economies and of our societies and reinforcing our economic security. So it's going to be a constant contest, but I think it's one that we have to keep very much in mind as we, as government policymakers, put forward measures and put forward policies on how we are going to address these challenges. So we're going to have to be very careful in how we deploy relevant measures, including the way that we screen investments, the way that we vet research proposals at our universities, and the way that we protect our critical infrastructure from risks such as cyber security. Again, another point that's been referred to by speakers earlier is remaining very alert to the potential use of security interests to mask protectionist economic policies. So we need to make sure that we don't, in our cure to the problems, create a bigger problem. So we need to guard against policy overreactions that might treat a symptom today but end up creating more costly problems later on. Now, it's true to say that supply chains are a very complicated thing. And when we look at the supply chain situation, one of the rules that, or one of the approaches that we apply in Australia is to remember that not every good that's vulnerable is critical, and that not every good that is critical is vulnerable. So we need to keep a very clear-eyed perspective on what are actually the supply chain risks that require government intervention. We also have the starting position that the private sector is best placed to address supply chain issues. So government can provide assistance, of course, targeted assistance that really keeps in mind that balance I talked about earlier. But it is going to be the private sector who turns its mind to issues such as trade diversification and how they can build reliable and trusted supply chains with partners, and a realisation that those reliable and trusted supply chains may not necessarily be the cheapest ones. Turning to the issue of domestic resilience. Now, this is making sure that we have mechanisms within our countries to be alert to potential risks and have a conduit for conversation between government and business on how to address them. So we have bodies in Australia established in recent years, such as our Office of Supply Chain Resilience and our Critical Technology Hub. And these organisations have a mandate to engage the private sector regularly on what the potential risks are and to act as a conduit between business and government and our national security community. So it involves having some very honest conversations between government and business about what the risks are, the geopolitical risks, the geoeconomic risks, and making sure that they are factoring them into their business decision making. I think a key point that we make to Australian business is that the situation we're seeing at the moment is not a short-term situation. This is a new normal going forward, so they need to be planning ahead. At the same time, we also take the viewpoint that innovative and creative business people will always find ways to get ahead in an evolving global economy. So we want to help our businesses to engage with that and understand risks and make good decisions. So we look for ways that we can provide data and analytical assessments to business, but we also think that governments can work together in a bilateral or a plurilateral or maybe even a multilateral setting to look at ways that we can establish early warning networks on supply chain issues. And we also continue to believe that transparent trade rules play a very important role in underpinning how this can all work. So in short, it's going to take a very sustained effort by countries, like-minded partners, to diversify and build the resilience that our economies are going to need going forward. And we need to take very careful steps to avoid any one particular country dominating supply chains of particular goods. One area that's been very topical in that respect has been critical minerals. And certainly there is a lot of work happening between Australia and Korea on ways that we can build alternative and secure supply chains in critical minerals that will help support the growth of our economies and that important decarbonisation pathway that I referred to earlier. So we will continue to support all of those efforts and we will work hard with countries like Korea and like-minded partners to find the solutions that will benefit all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Raper. You mentioned many important issues, particularly, both Australia, Korea want to maintain open and rules-based, the trading system. So we both participating in the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, even though it doesn't have any detailed kind of content in it. But Australia has some specific idea or position how to, promote Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Maybe you can say that a little bit later. Now I want to invite Professor Son Yeol from Yonsei University, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. I'm honored to be part of this great panel, and also I'd like to thank you, Chancellor Hong, for including me. I was asked by the chair to speak more about geopolitical risks and that dimension. So my presentation will be, first I'd like to present maybe pessimistic scenario for the next, coming years and decade. And second, what can we do? So that's the topic that I like to address now. Economic security risks come from various sources, from natural disasters, pandemic, wars, and also from economic sources like financial crisis, energy crisis. And what I'm going to talk is, the risk coming from the states. So, in this case, states, for geopolitical reasons, typically weaponize economic interdependence and give the other an economic security crisis. And here, the most consequential geopolitical challenge is obviously U.S.-China strategic rivalry. And this is an ongoing phenomenon, and it will continue to dominate the world for the foreseeable future. And we know that, we are predicting by 2030, Chinese economy will catch up or come close to the United States. And also by that time, in the Western Pacific, Chinese military capabilities, conventional military capabilities will come close, or even, according to some other sources, surpass that of the United States. So in those years, we'll see a sustained and even increased strategic rivalries that already started from trade and advanced technologies and to values and political systems, and I just mentioned to the military side as well. So here I just want to bring up one international relations theory, which is security dilemma theory. It holds that the mistrust between rivals, in this case US and China, would lead to the spiral of tension. And that mistrust actually comes from dramatic change in the distribution of power and also some psychological factors, including values, political systems, democracy versus autocracy, things like that. And all these are played out very well in domestic politics in the United States and also China, as we saw that very rare consensus over China issues between Democrats and Republicans in the United States, and also President Xi's the recent speech that heavily emphasized on the national security. So with developing mistrust would, according to the theory, would lead to the situation in which one party takes precautionary and defensively motivated measures that are, however, perceived to the other as offensive threats. And this leads to countermeasures and ratcheting up tensions and creating self-fulfilling prophecies about the danger of one's security situation and its future. So if we partly apply this to the economic security situation, we might call it economic security dilemma. Security dilemma in this case is not by economic means, but by security military means, but economic means. Minister Yu mentioned Made in China 2025, which aims to make key industries autonomous or self-sufficient, moving up to the level of 70% of self-sufficiency by 2025. And the U.S. Chips and Science Act and also Inflation Reduction Act, even though the last two have foreign exclusion element, but those are can be understood as neo-mercantilist industrial policies. And East Asia actually has a rich tradition of neo-mercantilism industrial policy. The lineage goes back to Fukoku Kyohei or Puguk Gangbyeong, rich nation, strong army, which is nice correlation of economy and security, and that has been a dynamic of economic growth and national growth in Japan and spread to South Korea, Taiwan, and even China. So, these practices it has happened in China and the United States, but what we've seen is the spiral of tensions that MIC 2025 is viewed as economic threat to the United States. Then United States, countermeasures restricting ZTE and Huawei, and the Chinese countermeasures, and CHIPS and IRA, and we would expect the Chinese countermeasures again. So we'll see, spiral of tensions. Not really like military, but we can predict a very similar dynamics of competition, which is very much will be destabilizing and often destructive. So, how to find solutions to this dilemma, security dilemma? In the case of original security dilemma, there are two. One is you have arbiter, third-party arbiter. In most cases, United States. that play a role in arbitrating two parties not to go to the worst case spiral between China and Japan. United States played a role, etc. But this case, United States is one. Two is direct negotiation and compromise of establishing some sort of rules-based order within which major powers, both two parties, compete. And this is the case that happened in history when both sides keep competing in a very destabilizing manner up to the point where all lose destructively. So, and not just two parties lose, but many other countries trading with those two parties. So even though United States and China will not be able, as Minister just mentioned, will not be able to decouple from each other and not to create separate blocks, but domestic politics works and mistrust works, and at least they will give it a try and find a place where it will not work, and then retreat and negotiate. That's what happened in the security, national security sides. So thing is that we should not repeat the history. We have to work together to find solution. Find ways not to repeat history, not to, have those two powers to move to that destructive course until when both parties and others realize that this is a dead end. So in doing so, I think, some secondary power coalition networks, including Australia, Japan, South Korea, and other middle powers to work together to sustain the current liberal economic order, which is obviously in disarray. But we have to work hard to not to move to that direction. And I will continue in our second round to give some policy prescriptions. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Your view from a political, geopolitical kind of angle is very important. Economic issues must consider that kind of aspect too. Your last part of your presentation, you mentioned that some kind of role of middle power coalition, middle power nations coalition can do something. We talk about that very often in the seminar, but actually how we can do it is very, very difficult, because now the two superpowers are fighting, and then how can we do anything more positive? Well, in any case, I want to ask panelist speakers if you have something to make comment on each other's presentation. We'll spend a few minutes to do that, and then we move to the second topic. Anyone? Yes, Professor Lee.
I would first like to answer the chair's question, but I do have an answer. I think that I do agree that China's market is still very important for Korean businesses to exploit, especially with regard to low-tech semiconductors manufacturing. However, we should also need to consider that the U.S. government has recently announced a very strong export control regime, which is very new. It is very comprehensive and multi-layered in a way that has made unilateral export controls multilateral, because it has applied the FDPR, the Foreign Direct Product Rule, which means that even foreign companies, like Korean companies, which want to export to China, if they're using any US manufacturing equipment or US technology, they cannot do so. So it's become multilateral. It is applied to Korea as well. And another thing is that they have ECCNs, which means that what was export controls, which used to be entity-based, entity lists, are no longer so, but they can be technology focused, which means that they can use this kind of new export control and expand it to other technology areas, meaning low-tech semiconductor areas as well, if they decide to do so. And so there is a high possibility that this kind of new form of export control can be expanded in use to even contain low-tech manufacturing semiconductor if the US wants to. So now it has the tools to do so. And so we're now at a risk where Korean companies are not safe from maintaining their current level of manufacturing facilities in China as well. So that's an answer that I wanted to provide. Thank you.
Okay. Well, Minister Yu.
I'd like to also follow up on that issue. Well, that's happening in a semiconductor industry, especially high-tech semiconductor industry. But as President Park mentioned, the overall bilateral trade between the U.S. and China, it has continued to grow even last year. So that is limited to a particular strategic industry, especially that is perceived to be to have some national security implications and concerns to the U.S. because of kind of dual-use technology. So there might be some partial decoupling to some extent in some strategic sectors if those export control measures are carried out to full extent for a long time. However, in most of the other sectors, the US and China, they continue to do business. The US is still China's the largest trading partner and the largest export market, and China is still US the largest trading partner and the third also the third, the largest trading partner. So likewise, Korea and China, China is Korea's largest trading partner, and our trade dependence is like 25%. So that does not mean, because we are so interdependent, total decoupling will be very ruinous. They will hurt, both countries and the world as well. So we have to distinguish those limited strategic industries and overall the comprehensive industries when we talk about the decoupling. Yeah.
Okay, Ambassador, do you want to add something?
I just wanted to pick up your point on what can countries, middle powers like Australia and Korea do, and Professor Son mentioned that as well. I think the first point to make is we have no choice but to do something, because our economies have been very reliant and have prospered on the basis of the rules-based trading system. So it's absolutely imperative that we continue to do what we can to support that. But I also think that we have something to bring to the table. We are often innovative. We can bring new ideas to the negotiations. We can often cut through where there are entrenched positions by some of the major powers. And we also have good relationships with many of the key countries. We're both US allies. We can have very honest conversations with them, including about how much the rules-based system matters to us and our economic prosperity and security going forward. So I do think there's a lot we can do, and it's important that we exercise that agency and authority in appropriate fora. Thank you.
Okay, then we want to move to the second topic, because we are speaking time goes very, very fast. So the second topic is, assessment on the future prospect of economic and security policies of new Korean government under President Yoon Suk-yeol. I don't know whether Ambassador Raper fully understand the direction of this kind of economic and security policies of new government, but in any case, we'll discuss this. Okay. So this time I want to go to the reverse order, asking Professor Son first. But now I don't want to give you 6 minutes. I want to give you only 4 minutes, because we have to talk with other people here in the audience. Okay.
Thank you very much. As I said earlier, South Korea's role, I think it's important. But to me, I mean, my impression so far is, I mean, toward the new government is that its economic security policy takes a very precautionary dimension and defensive. So how to respond to the external the risks, and that response would be sort of defensive and bilateral. But as I said, that we would need to establish or reestablish a flexible and stable rules-based international order. That could be liberal or others, but we need some orders under which major powers play and compete heavily, but within the limits. So how to establish that, and Professor Park, Minister Park just mentioned how. I have no clear answer, but South Korea can start from the issue of economic coercion, simply because South Korea has suffered two major shocks, one from China, the other from Japan. And in other words, South Korea has rich experience of receiving economic coercions and how to respond it. So I think the starting point is to assess the effects of economic coercion. So Chinese coercion in 2016 onwards, and Japanese coercion in 2019 onwards, and it is still going on, not fully completed. And whether the other parties' foreign policy goals have been met. In both cases, I don't think that they fully met those objectives. Towards South Korea, and some other byproducts and after effects, including public image of Korea toward those countries are really bad. And in terms of in terms of public diplomacy, those two incidents really made a huge negative impacts on South Korea and bilateral relations, and et cetera. So that assessment, and also conditions by which economic coercion works or does not work, that to study together with other fellow countries like Australia. You also experienced it. And Japan. They did it to Korea, but they were received economic coercion from China in early 2010. So those countries can work together to do all these studies and assessment and find ways to resolve. Deal with economic coercion, and we can find some sort of collective resilience regime, and then expand to the larger forum, and then maybe elevate to an international norm. So that could be one area of South Korea's contribution in terms of middle power network. And two, have time?
1 minute.
Stop.
1 minute. 1 minute.
1 minute. Okay. The larger issue is about globalization. Currently, we are facing a retreat of globalization. We called it deglobalization, but that doesn't serve our national interests. So what is needed is reglobalization, which is not repeating, reviving the previous globalization, which has lots of problems. So the reglobalization includes more inclusive globalization that deals with income inequality, social unrest, and etc., and political polarization as well. And also we would, should find resilient globalization that deals with economic security issues. So we would. It also starts from the region. I think if South Korean government venture into the Indo-Pacific, then we would think of inclusive and resilient globalization in the Indo-Pacific.
I like your word of re-globalization, not deglobalization. Ambassador Raper, maybe you can have a good recommendation to the Korean government.
Well, I guess my first point to make would be that we very much welcome that the Korean government has got in at the ground floor on the IPEF, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity. And I might say, in that respect, is not repeating the mistake that I think Korea made with the CPTPP of not being in on that earlier. So being in IPEF early and strong and a full member at the table, I think has been a very important and welcome move. Now the IPEF is being both touted and criticised for being a different sort of trade agreement. And I think it is true to say that the absence of market access will make some of those negotiations challenging. But I think it's also useful to focus on what IPEF offers that's new and different. When you look at the issues that it's been designed to address around trade and supply chains and clean energy, it actually goes very much to the heart of the key risks that we identified in the earlier session to our economies and to our region. So we think it will play an important role in setting rules and standards for the region, in building and furthering regional economic integration, and in looking at ways that we can actually tackle in an innovative way the diversification of supply chains and their resilience, and how we can help encourage climate finance solutions and clean energy capability building. Also digital trade, I think, is another important area that will feature in the IPEF. The other important point I make about IPEF is that it is complementary to other efforts. So we are both, Australia and Korea, members of RCEP and of APEC, and of course the WTO, as I stressed earlier, remains very much at the core of everything that we are doing in the region. But I would also encourage the Korean government to look very carefully at the CPTPP. This is a very high standard agreement, a very comprehensive agreement, and it does offer something to Korea that other agreements don't, and that is a common set of rules on things such as rules of origin, investment, intellectual property, e-commerce. So in a time when it's all about secure supply chains and diversification and making sure that you maximise the opportunities for your exporters and your consumers, it just seems a no-brainer that is something that Korea should be tackling. The final point I'd make is to welcome the more active role that this Korean government is taking in global and regional affairs. Certainly under the global pivotal state heading, we're seeing a lot more activity, a very positive agenda from the Korean government, and that's including the development of an Indo-Pacific strategy, which is a very welcome step. So we're looking forward to continuing to work with that very much more active, outward engaged approach. And we think that very much reflects a country of Korea's economic power and influence. So I see it as very much Korea stepping up to the plate and really delivering on the role that it can play in the region and globally. But I might leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I think your view on Korea's accession to the CPTPP is completely shared by Ambassador Turner from New Zealand, right? Am I right? Yeah. So now I'll invite Minister Yoo Myung-hee. Maybe you will mention something about our CPTPP accession negotiations.
maybe in Q&A session later about the CPTPP, because I have only 4 minutes given. Well, in regard to Korea's economic security policy, it seems that the economic security and supply chain resilience have become important consideration for Korea's economic and trade policy in light of the vulnerabilities exposed by recent developments. And in that regard, Korea has been strengthening various bilateral and multilateral initiatives to strengthen supply chain resilience and economic security. And I'd like to just make a couple of points or suggestions to deliver good outcomes or mutually beneficial outcomes from those initiatives. First, economic security as an open, free trading nation. Well, I understand the narrative, the emerging narrative that economic security is national security. Why we need that, and the economic security is really creeping in various calculations and in formulating our trade policy. But just now, I'd like to remind you that the very first person, the DC trade official who used that phrase was actually Peter Navarro, who used to be the trade advisor to President Trump 5 years ago. So to him, trade deficit was the threat to national security, and that's why he argued that U.S. had to terminate Korea-U.S. FTA. So what I am saying is that what is economic security after all? It's all in the eyes of the beholder. So as a open free trading nation and also as a global manufacturing powerhouse and the 6th largest exporter of the world with a relatively small domestic market, we should be wary of the emerging narrative or the mantra that economic security is national security, because it could create a permanent state of exception in trade law and justifying broad protectionist measures and widening the scope of excusable protectionism around the world. So in this regard, in formulating, in designing and implementing Korea's trade policy, it shouldn't be the centerpiece or feature and key feature of our trade policy. In that regard, because we should not overplay the concept because it could unnecessarily constrain our business activities. That's my first point. My second point, as I briefly mentioned on the first topic, there are some tensions at play in supply chain corporations. So managing those supply chain tensions is important to achieve successful outcomes. To achieve mutually beneficial outcomes from bilateral supply chain corporations as well as the IPEF supply chain pillar, we need to address those tensions skillfully, especially based on building trust between and among partners. For example, each country has an interest in promoting growth and jobs in its own domestic economy. And policies to promote onshoring of technology production of each country, it can actually work against each other. For example, in the case of IRA, so there are certain limits to how far they will be willing to collaborate. In addition, greater supply chain resilience comes at a price. At a certain point of time, either companies or consumers have to pay for the price, whether it will be stockpiling or diversification or reshoring, especially in this very high inflation environment. So as such, achieving mutually beneficial outcomes from this initiative, it will be very costly, time-consuming process. That's why we need to really work together closely based on trust. And in the process, if there are any issues, any concerns, we need to try to address them as soon as possible, based on trust among the partners. That is my second point. And last but not least, this actually is related to my first point as well, Korea as an open trading policy, open trading nation. Korea, as well as many countries in Asia-Pacific region, we could not have attained our prosperity without an open rules-based trading system. So WTO and the multilateral trading system, they are essential global public goods. Maybe the public now has taken for granted, but without that, the global trading system would be less stable, less certain, and less efficient. So now, as a global pivotal state, Korea has to take greater responsibility and contribute to improving and updating the system. So building on its rich experience in FTA negotiations as well as dispute settlement cases, Korea should lead efforts in revitalizing the WTO negotiating function and also restoring the dispute settlement system so that WTO can reform itself to make it fit for the reality of 2020 and also beyond. That's what Korea should do for the world, for itself and also for the world. That's my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your last part is very important. I completely share with your view. Well, Professor Lee.
Yes.
Yes.
I think that for recommendation to the current Korean government with regard to what to do about economic security, if we define our economic security as promoting our national interests in terms of protecting our economic competitiveness, I think that our position or our characteristic or feature of being a highly trade-dependent country is an important consideration to make in devising our economic security policy. I think I've been emphasizing this throughout my comment in the first part of the round. So I think that a regime where we have unilateral or multilateral export controls, which restrain countries from engaging freely in trade with countries they want, and raising barriers to trade and investment, making entries into foreign markets, using perhaps too excessive standards based on environmental reasons or labor standards may not be desirable to countries like Korea, which need more balanced approach in making these rules. Of course, restoring the WTO would be the best solution, but I think we acknowledge now that it may not be possible in the near term at least. So we may need to work with second best solutions. I think for now, the IPEF is the second best solution that we have right now in the Indo-Pacific region. It starts with the Asia-Pacific region, but the US has similar initiatives going on in the European region, like the TTC, and also in the Americas region, like the APEP, and also in the African region. So it has many regional initiatives like the IPEF being applied around the world. And I think that what the US is doing is making another kind of template, like what it did during for the Tokyo round, the plurilateral codes, Tokyo round codes, which actually led to making the WTO agreements. And so I think that the IPEF, although it's at its very initial form, it could be used as a sort of a regional template that can serve as a building block to this new kind of international rule that we need very much to provide the predictability and stability that our companies need to do their businesses in the region. So I think that it's a very, although it's very murky at the moment and it's very vague and we don't know where it's going, I think that middle power countries like Korea and Australia and New Zealand and other countries need to make sure that the new rules are balanced enough to reflect both the demands or the needs of the developed economies in the IPEF and also the developing economies in the IPEF. So it reflects the concerns of, in a multilateral way, and also be effective and binding at the same time, sufficiently binding so that the rules do work. So it will be a difficult task, but I think that for a starting point, IPEF is a valuable initiative for us to work together on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I actually said that we'll have another small, discussion among speakers, but I will skip that, for the second topic. I'll open the floor so that we can have some, questions and comments from the floor. Is there anybody who want to ask? Yeah. Please identify yourself briefly and then ask questions or make comments.
Yeah, thank you so much. I am Chung Myun Lee and the president of EFANS, which organized this meeting. I really thank all the panelists for their excellent opinions and comments. And as a president of the organizing institution, let me play the role of linking the first session and the second session. In the first session, the Professor Mearsheimer, who is called open, a big realist in IR scholarship. He said that he talked about the change in the basic system under which we are living. He said that the world has moved from the bipolar system before 90s to unipolar system before 2017, and now to multipolar system, which is composed of three main pillars, including US, China, and Russia. And he empathized that Korea was very fortunate to have the so-called unipolar system. Under that system, he said, Korea was able to cooperate with China economically under the umbrella of security provided by the US. I think his opinion is sort of from the perspective of international relations and scholar. So I want to hear the views from the panelists from the perspective of, economist or from the economic perspective. Do you agree with his opinion that the Korea was very fortunate to have the so-called unipolar system, under which Korea was able to economically, utilize the Chinese economic power under the umbrella of security provided by the US. Do you agree with that? So my question is very simple. Do you agree or disagree? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to collect a couple more questions from the floor. Ambassador Turner from New Zealand.
Thank you, Minister.
Yeah.
And thank you, everybody, for a most enlightening panel discussion. Indeed, I completely support Ambassador Raper's comments that CPTPP, Korea has a strong interest in joining, and we agree that with Ambassador Raper in urging Korea to do so, and a bit puzzled by the delay in doing so, given that even the previous government committed to doing so last December, and unfortunately failed to do so. So I guess I support the comment from Ambassador Yu about economic security being very important, but also a risk of it being overplayed and dominating our trading agreements at risk to our broader prosperity. So I guess my question for the panel is, taking aboard the positive comments about IPEF, again, which I agree that does seem like a good way forward with some excellent opportunities to develop new approaches in many areas. But I guess the New Zealand view would be that we should be, and Korea, we hope, would also be supporting both IPEF and CPTPP. And I get the impression that CPTPP seems to have fallen off as a priority and been replaced by IPEF, perhaps because, one, the United States wants it, and secondly, it seems to be politically easier to deliver than CPTPP. But I'm not saying that one is more valuable than the other. I think they're both important, and I worry that we are losing the priority that was attached to CPTPP. Thank you.
Is there any? Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Hyungmin Park, and I'm with the economic section of U.S. Embassy Seoul. Thank you all the panelists for your fruitful comments, and I just wanted to touch upon ways to tackle economic security matters domestically. I personally think one of the biggest domestic risks regarding economic security is the lack of cooperation of the ministries in the Korean government. For example, MOFA recently opened their own economic security diplomacy center, and MOTI also deals with trade matters, and MOEF also has their own mechanism in dealing with economic security matters. However, with these multiple overlapping organizations within lots of ministries, with no leading organization, and with the lack of cooperation among them, such as not sharing information and not sending over officials to one another, no matter how much panelists here, such prominent figures like yourselves analyze the problem, we won't be able to deal with economic security matters effectively when such problems arise again. So just wanted to ask, what would be the effective way that the Korean government can do domestically in order to deal with such a global problem like economic security? Thank you.
Okay, for now, these 3 questions are enough. So, I will just ask each panel, each speakers. You don't have to answer all questions, but relevant things you can pick up. I will start with Minister Yu.
So perhaps I will answer the first 2 questions. Regarding the third question, I'm out of practice as trade minister, so maybe those people who still work for the government, you can answer them. Well, regarding the first unipolar question, I don't think it will be only the issue of Korea. I think for the last 7 decades or in the last 3 decades, for many countries, international economic relations and international politics have been quite often separated. Although international politics have always influenced international trade policies and negotiations, but still international economic relations have been governed by its own set of rules, based on our Bretton Woods system, and try to be governed by the win-win, by the mutually beneficial rules of the Bretton Woods system. However, for the last several years, because of all the geopolitical developments that I mentioned before, international politics has taken over the international economics or trade policies and negotiations, and affecting those international trade rules that's happening not only in Korea but around the world. Now we are now seeing more and more intersections between trade, security, industry, and technology, and that's why we have now new passphrase of economic security, and a new mantra of economic security is national security. So I don't think only Korea has enjoyed the unipolar benefit, but many of other countries. But that doesn't mean that we should just not stop there, but because the public goods that we enjoyed has provided the very the element that has made our success possible, made our prosperity possible. I think that's the responsibility and role of the Korea, to provide that to us as well as to other countries, so that we could still continue our prosperity in the future as well. Regarding the second question about the CPTPP as well as IPEF, as a former trade negotiator, there are two tracks of negotiations: internal or domestic negotiation, and external and negotiation with your counterparts with other countries. And it seems that domestic negotiation and consultation gets more and more important these days. Like in the US, because US couldn't get the domestic support from the Congress on the CPTPP, on the TPP. So that's why Trump administration withdrew from the TPP and Biden administration could not rejoin the CPTPP. Likewise, in Korea, it takes time to get sufficient support and to have sufficient consultation with our agricultural stakeholders and get their support on joining the CPTPP. So, and it's important and gets more and more important. So we are still working on that. As far as I know, we are still working on that. And in regard to IPF, without agricultural market.
I mean, you can end your sentence. I mean,
So yeah, I think I should stop here so that
I'm sorry.
I should turn over this to other panelists. Okay.
For the first question, you say yes, I agree. I don't agree. Just simple answer for the first question. For other questions, you can make some comments.
Okay.
If you want to make answer to the
just,
first question. Do you agree or do you don't agree?
Yes. It's not a hearing. Okay, so yes, during the Unipolar world, we see multilateral rules are sustained by the United States. Economic, multilateral rules, and we have hub and spoke system, which is a security. And general rule is there's a rule or principle of a separation of economics from politics. So two coexist, and that's under the unipolar system. But now, you said, or Professor Mearsheimer said that the world structure, international structure, moved from unipolar to multipolar. Then we see more of, so previously what we called, we can say, de-securitization. Then now it is re-securitization, and then, obviously, then we'll see some conflicts, particularly with regard to China. So that's what, many countries are facing trouble today.
Okay, Ambassador Ray.
My answer to the first question would be that undoubtedly US partnership and leadership is very important for Korea's economic development, but I would also say that the rules-based international trading system has been just as important, as has Korea's own innovation and R&D spend in advancing technology, as well as the contribution made by reliable partners such as Australia, who have provided many of the resources which have fed into Korea's own industries and exports. I won't speak to the second question, you've heard me on that. On the third question, I would just point to an important office in the presidential office. There's an economic security secretary there. So maybe that might provide one avenue to join up the different parts of the Korean government engaged on economic security. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Lee.
Yeah, for the first question, my answer is yes and no, because I do agree with the unipolar system providing a security umbrella, but I think that it's actually the multilateral trading system that was provided by the unipolar system that enabled Korea to become so prosperous now. And I also disagree with, if I understood correctly, that Korea was fortunate to be able to utilize China. I think that it goes both ways. China also utilized other countries under this security system and the multilateral trading system to be able to prosper to this level of economic development. And so my answer is yes and no. As regards the last question, I think the second question was answered very well by Minister Yu. So I do agree with your point that there is a control tower in Korea, the Economic Security Secretary in the presidential office. If you look at other countries, they don't have this kind of control tower. They have the DOC or the BIS, other departments that work with different functions with regard to economic security related measures. They don't call it economic security. I think it's only Japan and Japan and Korea, which has this control tower for economic security. Maybe to make the ministries work in a more coordinated way, we may need a legislation like Japan has. Maybe that's a way to make the ministries work together more effectively, but I don't know what the plans, if there are plans to do so or not. So thank you.
Thank you. Is there any very urgent question to raise? I mean, otherwise, time is running up, so I want to conclude. But regarding Ambassador Turner's question on CPTPP and IPEF, my answer is IPF doesn't include market access. CPTPP has a market access. That's the reason why we are so much struggling. I think this is the answer. I don't know. I'm also not working for the government anymore. But anyway, we have a very, actually we are tasked to, too much tasked to discuss because two big questions, but we effectively manage answering all kind of questions and topics for this session. I don't want to repeat anything. I want to thank our speakers, and also I want to thank the audience in the floor. I want to conclude this session. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Park, and thank you everyone for your intriguing discussion. Next session, Audacious Initiative for the Peace and Stability on the Korean Peninsula and the International Cooperation will begin at 3:50 p.m. Please come back to the channel at 3:50 for another round of stimulating discussions. Thank you.